To me, the most important thing for beginner runners is to have a purpose as to why they're pursuing running. And everybody has a different reason. If you're running in a big marathon, oftentimes people will ask the person running next to them, what brought you into the sport? And you'll hear a gazillion different reasons. And that's what's so great about the sport of running. It welcomes everybody for different reasons, different purposes. It could be just to improve one's health, and anybody can find their way into our sport. I was recently asked, am I too old to start running? You're never too old to start running. You're never too old to start learning. And I think that's something that we all need to recognize. Whether you decide to train with a group or train on your own has to be and is a personal choice, because only you know how you're going to fare with or without training partners. And I would especially tell beginning runners to find a training partner, because sometimes it's really hard to overcome those early obstacles as one starts out in our sport. But if negative thoughts start presenting themselves to a new runner, then it's a lot easier to get rid of those negative thoughts if you know you have somebody out there waiting to run with you. If you're new to the sport of running, the shoes are really important, and they're different shoes for different body types, different foot types. You're not going to order online. You're going to go to a running specialty store and have a knowledgeable salesperson fit you to the right shoe for your foot. You have to think about the body mass and the impact with every step or every stride. Bone strength is certainly a concern. Some runners will opt for a shoe that accommodates an orthotic if they have a history of foot problems. I mean, there are all sorts of things to consider, but I think those are some of the basic concerns. And if you have a friend who's a runner and they tell you, oh, I love this shoe, go get this shoe. No, because what's working for them might not necessarily work for you. So that's the first step in starting to run. For new runners, it's all about time. And you can determine how much time you want to be out there, and then you can determine how much of that time you want to be walking and how much of that time you want to be jogging or running. And every runner's going to be different. They need to meet it where they are at that time in their lives. There's no set rule as to how much you have to walk and how much you have to run. You sort of feel that. And for many people, they'll just go out for a 15-minute walk for a week or for days. And then they may say, hey, I'm getting faster and faster with my walking pace. I wonder if I can run a little bit. You can work with ratios in much the same way that an elite athlete will work with intervals. When you're starting out, you may choose to walk 5 minutes and run 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes. Then as you get used to that set of increments of time, you may want to walk for 2 minutes, run for 5 minutes. Make it a game, make it fun. Maybe you're going to count telephone poles. It depends upon where you are. Maybe you're going to count fire hydrants. Make it something that's sustainable in your life. But whatever works for you, works for you. Just make sure that if you want running to be a part of your life for a long period of time, make it manageable, make it doable, and make it fun. Oftentimes I think of myself as having been in the right place at the right time for many of my accomplishments. And I think that starts with my career as a student athlete in high school. And that is exactly the same time when Title IX legislation became law. Title IX was law that was passed in 1972, as it applies to athletics and college athletics especially, and then further on to the Olympics. It did not allow for any discrimination based on sex and gave equal opportunities to women. And so it really opened doors. That's why I had the opportunity to then go from running as a member of a club to a member as a team. Men had, football and opportunity. Walked on that afternoon who was bringing two girls along the Olympics or aspirations of making it to the Olympics or into a world championship as a ski racer. And my dad brought us up on skis, my brothers and I, about the same time that we were learning how to walk. And he had a real passion for skiing and had served in the 10th Mountain Division during the war. And he wanted his kids learning how to ski as early as possible. That was one of the few sports that I could do as a young girl. I could ski and I could play tennis, and that was about it. So that's where my dream was, to make it into the Olympics as a ski racer. And then I broke my leg ski racing my sophomore year in high school. And as soon as the cast came off, I turned to running as a form of rehabilitation. And that's when I discovered that I had a real passion for running because it was easy and fun. So I started challenging myself with longer and longer distances. Girls didn't exercise back then, or it wasn't proper really for young girls to engage in rigorous exercise, as in the so-called experts in sports before the '84 Olympics thought if a girl or a woman ran more than 1,500 meters, she'd do bodily harm and never be able to bear children. And 2 children later and 150,000 miles under my belt, I'm still out there doing it. And I had no idea it was going to carry me as far as it did in the sport of running. I thought it was going to help me in recovery so that I could get back in the starting gate of the ski racing scene the following year, and I quickly discovered no guts, no glory. So the 1979 marathon was really my first marathon, and I didn't really have a clue what Boston was all about. And I didn't know anything about the course. I knew it started in the small town of Hopkinton, and it ran through several towns into the city of Boston. And I knew Bill Rogers. I had met him at some local road races. And he was really surprised to see me when they brought me into the garage and wrapped me in a wool towel and gave me some beef stew. I mean, it was really different back then. And I think he was expecting to see Patty Lyons Catalano, who was the favorite in that race and who I passed just summiting the Heartbreak Hills, and then asking the man running next to me at the time, how much longer should I reserve my energy for the Heartbreak Hills? And he looked at me like I was crazy and said, you just passed the Heartbreak Hills? And so I ran and I heard Tom Grilp, the announcer, just shouting out my name, that I was coming to the finish line, and that's when it finished at the Prudential Center. And I didn't know what to expect. I certainly didn't expect to win. I was just seeing what it was all about. And then the onslaught of attention and press and requests was almost too much for me to handle, because I certainly wasn't expecting any of the fanfare. And I remember lying down on our family's living room rug, and nobody was at home, and I said, why did I just do that? Because I was such a private person, and I just ran because I loved to run, but I just wasn't ready to become a public personality in our sport. And I've evolved into a place of comfort and trust, and it all worked out. But I was talk about when you walk away from something. I was ready to walk away right then. Goal setting is very important. I think for anybody who's pursuing anything in life, it gives you a mark to go after. If you don't have a goal, what are you aiming for? And you don't want to go through life aimlessly, so set a goal. For me, putting a goal out there, whether it's something like a dream that I want to come true, like becoming a world champion or an Olympic winner, it gives you reason to work hard to achieve that goal. And it's the carrot that dangles, if you will. Think about climbing a mountain. I've actually climbed several mountains, including Mount Kilimanjaro. You don't just say, I'm going to climb Kilimanjaro, and then go do it without a plan. You need to think about setting a number of different goals for yourself in order to accomplish your big goal. So when I think of goals, I think of long-term goals, and I think of short-term goals, and I think of intermediate goals. And what I try not to think about is compromising those goals. So a long-term goal might be to run a marathon, just to run a marathon. Another goal for somebody else might be to run a 5K. For the beginning runner, the goal might be to do a 5K, and that means a combination of running and walking and jogging. And then she may say, I've run the 5K, now I want to run the 10K. So that was now an intermediate goal, and now she's going after an even longer term goal. You need to set goals at each and every one of those levels in order to achieve success. And whether it's a weekly goal, a monthly goal, or for me, a long-term goal, which might be running a marathon, 3 months out from when I actually start setting my goals, I find it's a highly effective tool. So the key in short-term goal setting is to make those goals practical and sensible, and something that gives you joy. And that's something that the individual runner has to assess. In setting up a schedule for running, whether you're a beginning runner or an intermediate runner or an elite runner, you've got to look at goal setting as something that's feasible, something that motivates you to get up and train every day or almost every day, and something that'll give you a sense of accomplishment when that goal is achieved. A short-term goal could be as simple as setting up workouts for a particular week or a month, knowing that these are the goals that you want to achieve during the course of a lead-up to a bigger event. Short-term goals are important to hit because if you can't hit your short-term goals, how are you ever going to hit your long-term or pie-in-the-sky goal? So goals may look different for everyone. In setting up my yearly schedule, short-term goals might be to run a fast 5K, a fast 10K, a fast half marathon, and then ultimately the marathon. Your short-term goals might look different from mine, but they have to be realistic for you because, as I've said many times, running should be something that you look forward to every day or 3 times a week or 5 times a week, however many times you're getting out there to run. And if you keep your eye on that goal, whether it's short, intermediate, or long, that should keep you moving in the right direction with your head. And if you wake up one morning and you have a run scheduled and you're just not feeling it, maybe a walk will suffice. Or maybe, hey, I have access to a swimming pool. I'm going to go for a swim today. Or maybe just take the day off and I'll pick it up on my next scheduled running day. What you want to avoid is fatigue, injury, and depression. People need to set their goals according to their desires and their passion for what it is they're doing and their overall goal in bringing a sport into their life or something new into their lives. A pie-in-the-sky goal is sort of like a dream goal, something that you think is possible, but you know it's going to take a lot of effort to get there. It's a goal that really motivates you to dig down as deep as you possibly can and to come up with a prize, so to speak. I think running needs to be a positive in everybody's life. And by leaping or taking too big a step toward a goal without filling in with the short-term and intermediate goals, you're setting yourself up for failure and injury. And if you fail too many times, then you're only going to become frustrated. And running should be something that gives you enjoyment and looking forward to getting out there and doing that run that will move you closer and closer to that goal. Long-term goal setting can look different for everyone, but the important thing is to have that carrot that dangles, to have that big goal out there. You know, as a younger athlete, I had goals of running marathons. But I tell people all the time, you don't have to run marathons to be a runner, because not everybody's cut out to run marathons, but set the intermediate goals to get you there. Don't take a crash course and say, okay, I just ran a 5K, now I'm going to run a marathon. It's only fair to you and yourself to take it one step at a time. 5K, 10K, 15K, half marathon, marathon. I mean, those are the incremental steps that will make a marathon experience a good one for you. Well, I think micro goals are important in one's training because when you confront injuries or setbacks or challenges, you need to set the micro goals, which are, in a sense, intermediate goals, just to keep yourself motivated. So coming back from injury, you know, it may be I want to go out and run for 20 minutes, or maybe the 20 minutes becomes 3 miles, or maybe the 3 miles becomes 5 miles. And those are the intermediate micro goals, just to get your head back to the level that you're hoping to achieve. So I would consider micro goals very useful and very motivating as well. When I hear a car approaching from behind, that's my speed work. I try to, it's sort of what was called fartlek, speed training, the Swedish word for speed play. And I try to beat it to a certain landmark that I see ahead of me. And I use that in running, and I use that a lot now in cycling. And it keeps me hungry, it keeps me going after something, you know, rather than just pedaling or running. You know, it's fun. How far am I going to get until that car passes me? And I play head games with myself all the time. I say, if I get to that fire hydrant or that phone pole or that tree or whatever it might be, then I know I'm going to do well in my next race. And if I don't, it's like, okay, you've got to work harder because that car beat you to that point. It's all up here. It's all mental play, which is important for runners to strengthen the mind. Goal setting plays a very important part in the mental aspect of running. You know, you're improving your fitness, your physical fitness while you're out there and doing fartlek or doing speed play or just playing games with your head and yourself. But you have to keep the sport alive at all times, I think. And this is one way that I'm able to do that. Getting to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro was my dangling carrot. I set a number of goals during my preparations for that trip that made climbing that mountain possible. You can't bite off more than you can chew effectively and efficiently. But another thing I learned about goal setting was sometimes you have to go a little bit beyond your short-term or your intermediate goal to achieve big-time success. And how I can explain that is to say every night or every evening when we reached a campsite at a higher altitude, we climbed a little bit higher than that campsite just to know that we could keep going beyond that point and feel okay. So we would set up camp, and then I would hike a little bit or climb a little bit higher, hang out for a little bit, and then come back. And that's sort of what I do with my training. It's always just one more. And sometimes that's helpful, and sometimes it backfires. But most of the time it's helpful. Well, in running, the physical component is certainly a big one, but the mental component is also very important. And some people will say it's 90% mental and 10% physical. I think that's going a little bit too far, but I certainly think my mental abilities as an athlete have helped me tremendously over the years, not only in competition, but also in coming back from injuries or frustrating periods during my career. The most important thing to me as a runner and as an individual living a full life is to find a balance. And if you're going to find a balance, you have to follow what I call the runner's triad or the athlete's triad or the triad for life. And that is finding a balance between your mind and your body and your spirit. I think being out in nature really builds my spirituality. I think when you're out on a morning run and nobody's out there with you and you hear the birds and you see the sun rising or you see the changing landscapes during the changing seasons, to me, there's nothing more spiritual when you realize you're part of that unit of nature and being. And that is definitely a spiritual component of what it is that I'm doing in my life, day after day after day. Your mind can be your biggest asset. It also can be a thorn in your side. There have been many times when I haven't felt like myself. And that's sort of a dilemma for me. I don't know whether I should train harder or whether I should take days off. You know, and that's something you really have to think about. And for me, that's the mental aspect of the triad. And sometimes it's hard to tell what the best thing to do is. I think there is a difference between thinking and believing, because when I encountered the issues with my knee before the Olympic trials in '84, what kept me going was the fact that I truly believed that nobody out there was training any harder than I was. And I have to confess that I really fed off of the hard and diligent training. It wasn't something that I was concerned about because I truly loved what I was doing. I think the importance of mental toughness in sport or in anything that you're trying to achieve is helping in the ability to overcome challenges and hardships. Everybody encounters obstacles or challenges in whatever it is they're trying to pursue in their respective careers. And I think the mind and the head can be a very important and necessary part of that road to success. I think runners, more than any other athletes, know their body intimately. And they're constantly aware of what's going on because it's pure sport. I mean, you don't depend on any other equipment except your own physical and mental body. just check in with yourself. Nobody knows your body any better than you yourself. And I think it's just through living through a workout or living through a day that you know when things are balanced and when things are not balanced. And I think it's up to you to tune in on what it is that you think is awry or not balanced or not working for you in a way that you would like it to work for you. And it's at that point you say, I'm going to make a tweak here or a tweak there. And maybe for a runner, it's running fewer miles a week, or maybe it's running more miles a week, or maybe it's running faster miles, or maybe it's doing more strengthening or stretching. But only the individual runner can figure that out. Nobody can get inside the runner's body except the runner. The whole concept of balance is something that develops over time. I think we all operate at our best when we're balanced in what it is that we're trying to pursue or achieve. So keep what works and let go. In running, there's a lot of letting go. I am not your geeky runner. I am one who feels it, literally feels it in my bones and in my muscles and in my heart. And I know what works for me. And I grab onto it and I run with it, so to speak. I think your mind can get in your way when you start to think negatively, when you have self-doubt. And those are the things that you want to erase from your screen, so to speak. You need to remain positive. You need to believe in yourself. You need to think that you can do something. You need to have faith in your preparation to get to that point where you currently stand. And you need to look forward. And oftentimes I'll tell myself, you just have to hang in there. You have to get to this point in the race. So in 1985 in Chicago, when I set the American record, Ingrid Christensen was in the race, and she was favored slightly above me leading up to that race. And we were running stride for stride, neck and neck. And I was putting out more than I had wanted to in the early stages of the race. And I just kept telling myself, you've got to get to 10 miles. And if you get to 10 miles and you're still feeling like this is a real effort, then you can drop off the pace and hope that she'll come back. But I got to 10 miles and she broke at that point, and I kept going forward. And at that point, I led, but I knew that Ingrid was right behind me. But I've never looked back in a race, and I've never dropped out of a race, and that holds true to this day. And I think mentally that's really hard to do. It's really hard to talk yourself out of dropping out of a race, and it's really hard not to look back. But if I look back, I'd be running somebody else's race because I'd be worried about what they were doing and feeling. And so that's what's kept me looking forward. You have to know your pain, you have to know your body, and you have to know when to cut it short or cut it off or take a day off. And that looks, different in every runner. I mean, every runner has a different pain tolerance, and every runner has ability to accept pain where it is or where they think it might go during a run. I mean, if you're feeling a cramp or a pull or a tightness, if you push through too hard, you may wind up with a bigger injury that forces you to take time off that you didn't foresee as you prepare for a particular event, or that forces you to take time off that you really don't want to take time off with at that point in your training. I think it's a really important tool to have as a runner when it comes to putting your mind somewhere else when you're enduring pain or feeling pain or fatigue. And just to take your mind outside the physical body is something that I think runners are pretty good about doing, because I think runners endure a lot of pain. I mean, it comes with the sport, it comes with the territory, it comes with the desire to improve. And so, the adage, no pain, no gain, goes in two directions. But there's a pain that you need to recognize as well that needs rest. And that's very hard for runners to discern. Sometimes runners don't want to go there because they don't want to take time off. Well, pain manifests itself in different runners and different athletes in different ways. And sometimes it's a pain that's brought on by fatigue, and sometimes it's a pain brought on by overuse, and sometimes it's a pain that exists just because you're having a tough day or a tough period in your training. When you're taking stock of what it is that you're trying to accomplish and you don't want to overcommit, or you feel that you need to take time off, if your body's telling you to take time off, you need to take time off. Sometimes I have had to tell myself, you can't keep running feeling like this. And I sort of feel when I cut a run short that I'm throwing in the towel, and how am I going to get back to another run and deal with pain that may be similar or different and continue to persevere and push through. So, whenever I'm thinking of cutting a run short, I take a real honest assessment of how I really am feeling and how I think I'm feeling. Mentally, it's hard to accept the fact that you're cutting it short, but in the long run, you're going to be better off for doing so. Runners think that they can keep pushing through, and sometimes it makes a runner and sometimes it breaks a runner. And only you can sense what you honestly need to do. What's so great about our sport is that you can do it anywhere at any time, and you don't need a lot of special equipment, and you don't need a particular environment. And so when you have access, anything can happen. Running is a great sport for minimalists, but you need to have the right shoe for the right foot for the right time. And what you're looking for in a shoe is comfort, durability, and flexibility, perhaps, depending on your foot type. Making sure you have the correct shoe for your individual needs is critical to your journey as a runner. You need to figure out what will work best for you. Are you running on hard surfaces all the time? Are you running on softer surfaces like trails and dirt roads and tracks? Are you running in the city on concrete? There are lots of factors to consider, but it's important to protect the foot and to make sure the foot is responsive in that shoe. This is a brand new shoe, and it has the outer sole, which is basically the tread, the midsole, and the upper. This shoe is a shoe that has been worn quite a bit, but it's not totally worn out. You can see the outsole and the midsole, and the width of the outsole is still pretty impressive. So what I would suggest to people is when they get to this point is that they introduce a new pair of shoes like this shoe at this point, and then I alternate the shoes every run. So my foot becomes accustomed to the slighter change than to this more drastic change. You can see the profile on the side. I've worn it down right to the midsole. That can be a pretty big change for a runner to go from a midsole to a brand new outsole with a much higher elevation. And those little changes can be significant, especially when it comes to injuries. Save yourself some issues by not letting it wear to this point, because that will potentially lead to an injury that will sideline you for a bit. I would just say toss the shoe, give it to a recycling program. There are several different programs, and you can find bins at most running stores to put your shoes in, and they will be recycled or repurposed for another population of people. You have to be totally comfortable in the environment in which you're training, because if you're in an environment that doesn't make you happy and doesn't give you joy, then how can you expect to demand extra efforts from your body? When I run without noise, except the noise that's emitted by nature. And that's why I think it's very important when you're finding a balance in your life in the sport of running, you need to be totally comfortable in the environment that surrounds you, because that environment should provide everything that you need to pursue your goals. The 4 different areas for me over the many years of my career have been the roads, the dirt roads, the trails, and the track. It's been said that shin splints are often developed when a runner changes surfaces all the time. So it's probably best to find the surface that works best for you and stick to that surface as much as you possibly can. The worst road surface of all, for me anyway, is concrete. And some of the bigger city marathons have sections that are on concrete. And there's a difference in concrete roads and asphalt roads. And most sidewalks are concrete. So I've been known to run alongside sidewalks just to get off the concrete and onto the asphalt. And I would say less and less of my training now is on the track. The roads are where I feel at home. And ironically, when I was in the Olympic Marathon in LA, I felt the most at home on the LA freeway, because I was running down the LA freeway all by myself, where there wasn't any vehicular traffic at the time. And I felt like I was back at home on a foggy morning running down the middle of the road. When I was at the height of my career, the track was a big piece of my training, simply because the track doesn't lie. It's an exact measurement, so you know exactly what kind of shape you're in. But you can't test yourself every day, because if you do, you'll run yourself into a hole. The impact on the track is softer because of the surface being softer, but you need to pay attention to the torque on your hip joints especially, and your knee joints for that matter. There are 4 turns to the track, and there are 2 straightaways. And so when you're doing repeat after repeat after repeat, that's going to put added stress on the joints, especially the hip joints, lap after lap after lap. So it's good to mix it up and reverse the direction on your cool down or between intervals if you're doing complete lap intervals. The track never gets old, even though it looks pretty simple, 8 lanes defined. And I would stagger workouts. I'd go lane 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then back in. I mean, if you're looking to change it up and you're tired of the roads or whatever, you can sort of gain a new awareness or freshness for what it is that you're trying to achieve via the track. When it comes to running technique, there's a ton of information out there, and sometimes that information is hard to navigate and process. The best advice I can give to you is to feel like yourself out there, to feel natural about the way you're running. Don't try to adapt to a prescribed running style. Run with your body and your mind in a way that feels natural and puts you in a position of inner peace, if you will. You need to feel fluid. You need to feel as though your body is responsive to the effort you're putting in to put one foot in front of the next. People have different stride lengths. People have different cadences. People have different arm swings. These are all factors that influence stride and efficiency and cadence. But I think the best tip I can offer runners is to say, run the way you feel. And, there are certain golden rules, so to speak, but there's always an exception to the golden rule. So when you're running on a flat surface, which is where most runners run, you need to be aware of a few things. Stride is the length that you cover between your landing foot and your takeoff foot. And the number of strides you take per minute is called your cadence. And an optimal cadence for most runners is 180 steps per minute. Beginner runners think, if I have a long stride, I'm going to cover more ground with each stride. But are you running efficiently? By taking smaller steps, you're apt to take faster steps because you're not braking to slow down that longer stride and to keep yourself balanced. It makes perfect sense that if you have a long stride, you're covering more ground and the faster you're going to be. But if that's not efficient for you, then perhaps you want to work on stride length exercises and drills and things like that. When you're running on a flat road, you want to feel efficient. You want to be comfortable with your stride. You want to feel like you're covering ground in good time, that you have a cadence that relates to your ability or experience as a runner. And it's going to take beginning runners a little bit of time to develop that cadence that's optimal for them. And you want to feel relaxed. You don't want to be overstriding. You don't want to be braking to let your trail leg catch up with your lead foot. You want your knee and your foot landing under your center of mass. And you just want to feel like you're out for a run. People have tried to change my stride many times, and it's never worked. It is what it is, and it will always be what it is until I can't run any further. My stride is the way it is because that's the way I have grown and evolved over the years of my life and my running career. There are lots of different ways to think about breathing when you're running, and there are all sorts of techniques and styles when it comes to breathing, in much the same way as there are different foot strikes in our sport with different runners. In breathing, there are mouth breathers, there are nose breathers, and there are mouth and nose breathers. And I happen to be a mouth breather. That works for me, and it works well because my jaw is usually very relaxed. And the real key to efficient running is being able to feel relaxed while outputting at a high level. And so mouth breathing is what works for me. Other people will say they like to inhale through their nose and take the breath all the way up from their belly and then exhale through the mouth. And that is sometimes referred to as 360 degrees breathing because it's full circle. When you're running downhill, your stride is going to change once again. And this is perhaps the time during my runs when I feel the most relaxed. And perhaps I shouldn't be for fear of falling downhill. But you really need to let go and to open up your stride and to let your arms flow freely at your sides and let the momentum carry you down the hill. When you're running uphill, your stride and your form and your technique is going to change slightly from when you're running on a flat surface. And when I'm running uphill, that's when I'm most aware of my arms. People need to discover their arms in running. I mean, there's a real use for arms, and there's a real efficiency that you can develop with your arms to match the strength of your legs. And I would just say to new runners, and even seasoned runners, discover your arms and use them. To be perfectly honest with you, I think my arms, more than my legs, lead to my efficiency as a runner. And other runners may have different views. But when I start to feel tight and like my stride is collapsing or when I'm slowing down, I say, okay, where are your arms? Use your arms. And to me, my legs are going to fall where they fall because of the mechanics that I'm dealing with. But my arms have different possibilities because they're more relaxed than my legs. My legs have pounded the same terrain mile after mile, year after year. And my arms are like floaters, and I can work with them more than I can work with my legs. Some runners who are very efficient don't necessarily look efficient, but they're using their own stride and their own arms to propel themselves forward in a way that works for them. But usually my arms are at about 90 degrees, and what's important here is to keep your shoulders and upper arms relaxed. Be aware of the angle of your arm as it relates to your shoulder and your elbow. Keep your fingers loose. Shake them out momentarily. I mean, there are often times in a race I'll be clenched like this, and I'll say, where are your arms, where are your fingers? And I totally shake them out and let the wrists go limp. But when I shake them out and then bring them back, I find that they're sort of rejuvenated and help with my arm swing. Relaxation is the key to the upper body. You want everything to be as relaxed and as powerful as you possibly can make them while avoiding injury. They say the knee bone's connected to the ankle bone, and it's the kinetic chain. It's from foot to head.
So the physical components of every joint, every muscle, every ligament, every bone, as well as the mental powers of the brain. It's the yin and the yang of life, right? I never was much of a stretcher. I never really stretched or did any strengthening exercises. All my stretching and strengthening was done in other areas outside of running. For instance, I'm an avid gardener. That to me was strength training, hoeing the soil, pickaxing the soil to break it up, carrying wood into the house to fire up the wood stove, cross-country skiing, pole action. I think it helped develop my efficiency as a runner because all of a sudden my upper body was more in sync with my legs and lower body because I was developing more and more strength in my arms. And I think efficiency is key to success for any runner. So that's what I did for strength and stretching. I just did daily tasks. But there came a time when the aging process set in and I couldn't just run out the door without jogging into a run and slowing down and jogging out of a run. As I aged and was starting to deal with more and more injuries, then I became a little bit more serious about the stretching and the strengthening. So as most runners know, there's a whole series of strengthening and stretching exercises to choose from. And sometimes it's difficult to choose the exercises that you know yourself, that you can find the time to do and to do correctly. Now I'm going to demonstrate some helpful stretches and strengthening exercises to hopefully inspire you to create your own routine. The squat is an important exercise for runners. It's also a very simple exercise. You can do the squat with or without weights. I choose to do my squats most of the time with weights, but if you're someplace and don't have weights, you can do squats with your arms out like this. Get to that 90-degree angle, keep on the ball of your feet, and then come all the way up, extending your knees as straight as you can without locking them. So with weights, obviously, my arms are going to be by my side. I'm going to go down and get the weights. I'm going to bring them up, and I'm going to go into full extension looking up. My knees are straight but not locked. Then I'm going to go down to about a 90-degree angle, and then I'm going to come back up, straight up, stand tall, and down again. It's just like taking a seat. You want to keep your back as straight as you can. You want to keep your core tight. You want to feel really firm on the ground and planted with your feet solidly below your shoulders. This is good for all your lower muscles and for your knees because you're strengthening the quads, the glutes, and the hamstrings, which support your knees. The number of reps when it comes to squats differs for everybody. I usually do 3 sets of 10 to 15 squats. I like to do my squats before my workouts. It makes me feel like I'm on track in every sense of the word. The side steps with the band are important because it helps to develop your lateral strength, your IT strength, your hip flexors. And as runners, we're moving forward most of the time, and anything we can do to support that forward motion is important. When you're doing a side step or a monster step, all you really need is a simple resistance band. And you can have as much resistance on that band or as little resistance as you want on that band. If you're dealing with an injury, you might want less of a resistance. If you're trying to gain strength, you may want a higher resistance. I usually will go 15 side steps in one direction, then I'll go 15 side steps in the next direction, and back and forth 3 times. Stay relaxed and remember to breathe. The squatted side step helps develop your core and glutes. Make sure to stay low and not to hyperextend your tailbone. Keep the spine long and your tailbone tucked. Don't let the tension go to your shoulders. Keep the focus lower in the core and glutes. When you're doing your stretching and your strengthening, you want to do them right. And I know myself well enough to know that I can do 3 or 4 each day or 2 or 3 times a week and do them effectively and efficiently. If I try to do more, I get sloppy, and that's not going to help me. The high knee exercise is important because it's developing that powerful set of glutes, and it's also adding to flexibility and stability because when you have one knee up, you have to balance a bit more on your knee that's grounded on the floor. Usually I do 3 sets of 10 to 15 reps, and that's commonplace for most athletes. I like the number 16, so I do 16. Because my philosophy is just one more mile, just one more rep. That's not always a good way to go, but that's the way I do it. When lifting the knees, make sure not to dump into your stabilizing leg. Try to keep lengthening through your stabilizing leg all the way through the hip and to the top of your head. Make sure not to lock your stabilizing knee. Keep a small bend to maintain activity in the leg in order not to relax into your knees. Pull your lifted knee into your chest and try to keep the upper body as relaxed as you can when doing so. When doing the extended high knee stretch, make sure you use resistance in the leg on the way down. You don't want to just let it drop. You want to stretch and extend through the glute all the way to the heel of the leg as you're lowering to get the best stretch. And again, don't relax into your standing leg. You want to keep lifting out of the hip and knees. The Achilles stretch is really important to me because I've had a history of Achilles issues. and Achilles help to stretch the soleus and the gastrocnemius, the calf muscles, if you will. With the Achilles stretch, you're not really doing reps. You're holding a position, and I would suggest you do it for 60 to 90 seconds. That's on each leg, and it depends upon if the runner is having issues with the Achilles. You don't want to overstretch, and you can stretch the Achilles at varying degrees if you have a slant board or an incline board. And if you don't have an incline board or a stretch board, you can use a stair or you can use a book. The one thing you want to avoid is bouncing on that Achilles while you're stretching. The foam roller is the tool I love to hate because sometimes it hurts depending upon if you have taut muscles. But I find the foam roller is easy to travel with if you're traveling, and you can just put it in the corner of a room where you tend to do your stretching and strengthening. I really like to use the foam roller on my IT bands, my glutes, and my hamstrings. Again, it's not an exercise of repetitions, it's an exercise of time, and that depends on the needs of the individual runner. If you don't have a foam roller handy, you can also use a tennis ball. I like to start with my glutes, rolling them out slowly, finding balance on the foam roller, and moving back and forth to relieve some of the tension there. Then I come behind the roller and sit, extending my legs over the foam roller. Now I roll out the back of my hamstrings. When doing this, make sure not to lock or hyperextend your elbows. Just like with your knees, keep a slight bend. Don't relax all the weight into your wrists either. Extend your hands and push into the ground with each finger. Now, on the side, keep your arm parallel to your body, stacking your arm with your shoulders. Use the other hand to stabilize yourself as you roll out the side of your hips and legs. Everyone is built differently, so if you need something to pad the stabilizing elbow, grab a mat or a towel. Again, extend through your shoulder. Don't let the energy sit into your elbow or shoulder when holding yourself up. Stay relaxed, and don't forget to breathe. Runners are notorious for having tight hamstrings. In order to do the hamstring stretch effectively, you might want a chair or a wall for a little bit of balance. You can also use a yoga strap or yoga belt. There are a variety of different ways to stretch the hamstring, and I choose the simplest forms. Again, it's sort of a static exercise. You don't want to rush through it. You want to hold it, and I would do it in a similar way to the Achilles stretch, 60 to 90 seconds. And then you can release, and then you can do it again, depending upon the degree of tightness in your hamstrings. If you feel like you need more than 60 to 90 seconds on each side, listen to your body, trust your instincts, and do what feels best for you. Planks are an exercise that are really helpful for the glutes and the lateral muscles and the core. And the best thing to help you with that is to think about your butt and your gut. Runners normally don't have very strong cores, and this is something most runners really have to work on. There are three variations, really, when it comes to the plank. There's the forward plank, the side plank, and some people do a back plank. I don't do the back plank very often. Sort of a difficult position for me to get into, especially if you're having issues with a shoulder. It's important for runners to keep their shoulders loose. Make sure to keep space between your chin and your chest and shoulders. Keep your upper body as open as possible and keep as much length in your neck as you can when stretching your legs out. Maintain a small bend in your knees so as not to put too much pressure on them. I think the exercise ball heel rollout really feels good. It makes me feel like I'm extending my body to its fullest potential, and it really stretches out the hamstrings. And again, you're helping and strengthening your glutes. I do all my reps in similar fashion. You know, I would do 10 to 15 reps, but some runners aren't going to be able to do 10 to 15, so start where you are. Meaning, if you can only do 3 rollouts, do 3 rollouts. And then 3 may become 5, and 5 may become 7 and 10, and so forth. The one important thing is not to overstrain or stretch when you're doing strengthening and stretching exercises. The bridges, again, are helping you to develop that core strength that's so important. And you're squeezing your glutes and you're bringing your stomach in, so you're developing your core. Some people may want to use a yoga mat to soften the surface, but you can do it on the ground or on the floor or wherever you might be. You can really do them anywhere at any place. People may look at you a little funny, wondering what the heck you're doing, but you're doing a bridge and you're getting ready to go for a run, or you're cooling down after a run. Bridges can be done before runs or after runs. Keep your shoulders back and your neck free. Again, extend through the leg you're lifting so as not to input all of the weight into your stabilizing knee. You should feel the glute and core start to engage as you lift. A slight point inward will help to protect your knees and back. I like the clamshell. Again, for me, it feels good. It feels like I'm opening up my hip joints, and it's important to keep your hips strong and moving smoothly. There are 2 types of clamshells. There's the normal clamshell, and there's the reverse clamshell. In one clamshell, you're opening your knees, and the other, the reverse, you're opening up your feet. It's important to keep your knees and your hips stacked when you're doing the clamshell. You can do the clamshell exercises with or without a resistance band. I like to use a resistance band because I think I have to work a little bit harder to get the results I want. The clamshell helps with the lateral muscles, it helps with the glute, and it helps with flexibility, and it helps with tracking. I like the clamshell exercises because it really makes me feel like I'm opening my hip joints and my hip sockets, and it also feels like I'm developing my lateral muscles that will help to track my knees going forward. Again, keep your hips and knees stacked and move slowly. This is not supposed to be rushed. It's supposed to feel good and enhance your flexibility as well as your strength. So don't just rush through. Make sure your body is in proper form when doing these exercises and stretches. Otherwise, you can do more harm than good. The clamshell exercises really feel good after a run. And it's always good to stretch the Achilles after a run. People interchange their strength and stretching exercises. Again, it depends on the individual runner and their interests or their injury issues or just wanting to feel smooth and flexible. If you're a first-time marathoner, your goal should be to complete the 26.2 mile. Time is not a factor for you. It's just completing the distance and going the distance and getting that medal around your neck at the finish line. And I think that's goal enough. And some of you may be walking the marathon. Some of you may be wanting to run the entire distance, and that's up to you as a first-time marathoner. I'm assuming you, as a first-time marathoner, have put in some miles to get you to the starting line. So I'm hoping that you've run at least 15 miles in training. A lot of people say 17 miles is the distance you need to have in your bank account in order to really feel good about getting to the starting line. And it's funny that a lot of people say it's a 17-mile run that'll nail the marathon distance for you. And that's the distance in the marathon that I want to be feeling good at, is the 17-mile mark. So it's interesting how that works out. But you don't want to head to a starting line in a marathon as a first-time marathoner not looking for a positive experience. You want to feel good about what you have done to prepare for the marathon. And that's going to help you both mentally and physically to complete your goal of 26.2 miles. When it comes to preparing for a marathon, I look at the target date of the marathon, the day on which the marathon is going to occur. And then I count backwards for 3 months. And that's when I really start my marathon training in earnest. At that point, I hit 3 important workouts each and every week: a long 20-mile run, an intermediate run, which is anything between 12 and 15 miles. And then I do some sort of a speed workout or an interval workout, or maybe even a race. So during the height of my career, I was running around 100 miles a week, anywhere between 90 and maybe a little over 100, but not well over 100. And a lot of elite marathoners today run upwards of 100 miles. But for me, I never wanted to leave my race on the roads. I wanted to save it for the actual race. And so 100 miles was pretty much the max I would run per week. And I filled in the workouts outside the speed work, the medium long run, and the long run with miles between 10K and 10 miles. And I tried to stay away from what I call garbage miles, just to up my mileage for that particular week, because I just felt they wore me down and might lead me to leaving my race on the roads. Now, for first-time marathoners, instead of having time goals, their big pie in the sky goal might be to just get from the starting line to the finish line. And that's all their initial goal should be. You just want to feel good and positive about your training that gives you the go ahead to get to the starting line, because you want to make the first marathon a positive experience if you're going to stay in the sport for a period of time. One part of marathon training that people often don't think about or don't consider important is the taper portion of marathon preparation. And that's the period of time, usually the last 2 weeks to 10 days before the actual marathon, when runners should be letting go of their hardcore training and relaxing and just focusing on the event itself, the mental portion of the event itself. And so in the last 2 weeks, my last long run is usually done 10 days before the actual marathon. And then I'll usually do something like 10 to 15 miles a week out. And then anything I do in the final week of the tapering is less than 10 miles. The hardest part of marathon training for me is the taper. And you just, as a runner, you don't want to let go. You don't want to give yourself rest. And it can be lost in the tapering. The marathon performance that you're wanting or desiring can be lost if you don't taper appropriately. And I still struggle with the tapering period. So I think the biggest mistake runners make while fueling themselves before a big race is either to overeat or undereat. And that's going to look different for every runner out there. The most important thing for runners when fueling for a big event, like a highly competitive 10K, 15K, half marathon, but especially the marathon, is to not introduce new foods right before the marathon. Whatever you're eating in the days leading up to the marathon, make sure are tried and true and tested, and that you can tolerate whatever food it is and digest that food appropriately and efficiently. You know, when I'm running a marathon, I'm, again, old school, and I'll safety pin a little baggie inside my shorts, and I'll put in whatever it is I think I might need while I'm out there. And sometimes the baggie is not touched at all, and sometimes it is, and it's usually an energy product of some sort. My advice, and strong advice to new marathoners especially, is to not test a food on the run. And that goes for any equipment associated with actually running the event. You need to prepare yourself for what a major marathon starting line looks like. It's a sea of people It's a 3 to 9 circle circus. There's lots of stimulation. There's lots of music. There's lots of chatter. There's lots of hullabaloo going on. It's just crazy. And so here you are preparing yourself mentally, resting up, trying to conserve your energy, and then all of a sudden, the whole world in front of you is lit up with unbelievable energy and colors, and it's magnificent. But you need to sort of get in the zone and get inside yourself and try to keep yourself as calm as you possibly can. The experience for the marathon when the gun goes off, especially for first time or beginner marathoners, is to wait. You hear the gun and then you wait. And sometimes runners are called to the starting line at different times because they have waves taking off at different times. And sometimes it's en masse and everybody goes, you just wait until you start to move. And it's really hard to move through a pack of marathoners if you're at the back of the pack. So again, patience comes into play. And what you try to do is find your path through a sea of people. The elite marathoners are often running. They don't have runners in front of them. They don't have runners to slow them down. But the beginning marathoners, the first time marathoners, are usually placed at the back of the pack. It's an honor system. They'll have corrals with expected times or pace per mile. Usually they have pace setters, people who carry colorful orange flags or yellow flags saying, I am running at this pace. If this is the pace you want to run, follow me. And people glom on to those pace setters because they have a time in mind that they want to run. And this person, if he or she is a good pace setter, will keep you on pace. And it's amazing how close these pace setters come to running that actual pace. Sometimes you want to be in that group of people. Sometimes you'll find that they're zapping your energy and you need to find your own space. But for beginner marathoners in a big major marathon, it's really hard to find that sacred space because there are a lot of people out there with similar ambitions and similar goals, and they're going to be by your side. Well, I think the biggest mistake a new marathoner can make is to write all their expected splits, meaning the time that's going to take them to run each mile or each kilometer, on their arms. And they're constantly checking their arms to see if they're on pace. And what many of these early new marathoners forget about is the fact that they may be standing around for a while during the first several minutes of the marathon. So that throws them out of whack for all the remaining splits on their arm. So I tell people, forget the splits. Run how you feel. Run as best you can, navigating the sea of people who are out there with you. Pay no attention to the time. Do the best you can. And remember, to think about the marathon distance in different chunks of distance. Don't think about 26.2 miles in one package. It's too overwhelming, especially for the early marathoners. But I tell beginning marathoners and even seasoned marathoners that it's best to be passing runners at the end of the race than it is to have runners passing you. So the holistic approach to recovery from an injury is knowing what you can do and knowing what you are willing to do and want to do. I mean, there's a whole protocol and several protocols of coming back from injuries. You have to listen to your body and see how far you can push it and when you have to say enough of the pushing and it's just about rest. And it's a waiting game oftentimes. The mind is part of the body, but the body is part of the mind too. And it's a constant tug of war, especially when it comes to recovering from injuries. I think it's a love-hate relationship with injury. I think that if you overtrain and are going after a goal and want to focus on that goal and know in your head what you think you need to do to get that goal, you're playing with fire when it comes to playing with injury issues. And I'm one to push it as far as I can, hoping to avoid injury, but sometimes stepping over that line and getting injured. And it's a really fine line. Back when I was training for the Olympics in '84, I was testing myself every day, every long run, trying to make my long runs faster and faster. And unfortunately, I pushed it a little too far. And I literally felt something unravel on the outside of my right leg. And it felt like a spring had unloaded. And I knew I was in trouble. So I panicked a bit, and I didn't know what to do. Then I went out to Oregon and I saw a surgeon out there who hesitated to do surgery and wanted to give me an anti-inflammatory. And I didn't think it was an inflammation problem. I thought it was a structural problem because of the feeling of that spring unloading. So how do you tell a world-renowned physician, surgeon, that he was misdiagnosing the issue? It wasn't inflammation. It was a structural issue. And that's why I keep telling athletes, you know your body better than anybody else. Listen to your body. So finally, he opted for the arthroscopic procedure, and this was 2 weeks before the trials. And I went through with the surgery. It was ambulatory day surgery. And I told him before the surgery, I said, if you get in there and it's a major problem, don't wake me up to tell me it's a major problem and I need a big-time surgery. Just fix the problem. And I woke up in a hospital room, and he walked in shortly thereafter. And he said, are you surprised to be here? And I said, yes, I guess you found more than we both had bargained for. And he said, well, not exactly. He said, your reputation preceded you, and I knew if I discharged you today, you'd go out and try to run on it tonight, so I'm keeping you here for 24 hours. That was the best thing he could have done because it kept me at bay, and I was able to bounce back. Now, the moral of that story is with injuries, you need to be very careful because you can develop compensatory issues. So by not trusting my knee after that surgery, not believing that everything was remedied, I pulled my opposing hamstring. And that was ultimately what almost kept me out of those trials because I could barely walk on my good leg because I had favored my right knee. And I think that's something runners need to be really aware of is the compensatory issues and injuries that arise from the initial injury. Yeah, the most important thing with wondering about if you're going to be able to endure the injury and get to the other side of it is not losing sight of your goals and being patient and realizing that you can gain other strength through other sports that will make you a better runner. And sometimes there's a silver lining. And I won't even say sometimes. I'll say oftentimes there's a silver lining with an injury. Or you always have to look for the light at the end of the tunnel, or you always have to make lemonade out of lemons. And there have been several instances during my career where I thought, okay, it's time to toss in the towel. And this might be one of those points in my life when I do, but I'm not ready to yet. I haven't given it my all. And only you as an individual or you as a runner know when you've given it your all and tried every avenue to find that success or find that way back. And things take time, and I'm trying to be as patient as I possibly can, but that's not one of my stronger attributes. So that's when I talk about gaining strengths that you didn't think you had or need to develop to a higher level. And so I think if I can bounce back from this current knee issue, I'll be a stronger person for it. Whether I'm a stronger runner, I'll be a stronger person. And ultimately, being a stronger person is much more important than being a stronger athlete. So I do have sort of a rogue style with my running stride, and it's, I think, the result of that ski accident when I broke my leg, my tibia at the top of my boot. And again, I didn't have a lot of patience even back then, and I probably came back on it too fast and bowed the actual bone when it was still mending. And I've had to deal with it ever since. But at the same time, maybe that's what set me apart from my opponents and gave me a stride that just worked for me better than the stride that I should have had. Maybe I had to work so hard to get into a rhythmic, efficient stride with that new change that I developed other strengths. Fortunately, I didn't develop a lot of compensatory injuries during that recovery and running all those years. Where you can err is when you push through sickness or an injury and your results start going in the other direction. And that can be mentally really, really detrimental to future running. And I remember just having to get this track workout, and I had a temperature of 102, and I had to go to the track, and I had to get this, and I fell way off. And that killed me for the next 6 months. It just killed me. So you have to know when to say stop. And I still, to this day, have a hard problem saying, okay, stop, recalibrate, reload, start again. I mean, because all the running I have behind me, it's like stockpiled. It's there, and I'll never forget how to run, and I'll always be able to bounce back once injuries have disappeared because it's just in the memory bank. There are not many runners who have enjoyed 6 decades of running, and I've been truly fortunate to run for so many years and still remain as passionate as I was when I discovered the sport as a teenager. Many years ago, 30 plus years ago, as a Nike athlete, Nike wanted to use me in a campaign entitled There Is No Finish Line. I was a new mother of 2 young children, and I still had aspirations and goals in the sport. And so I agreed to go out on a country road in Maine to shoot this ad. And a couple of years passed before I realized what that adage meant. And I sort of discovered it on my own. Every time I crossed a finish line, I was able to set a new goal for myself. Regardless of the distance of the race where that finish line was, there was always another goal I set for myself, or another purpose to run another race, or another benchmark to hit in my career. And that has kept me going all these years. One of the races I spectate is the race I founded in my hometown of Cape Elizabeth, Maine. And that was my opportunity to give back to a sport in a community that had given so much to me. And I believe in paying it forward. And I love watching the elite athletes cross the finish line. And oftentimes it's a really close and exciting race. And then you see all the recreational runners come across. And then you see the runners who are just trying to cover the 10K distance. And a lot of these people came off the sidelines because they were inspired by watching earlier races. And they want to test themselves by going the distance. And you see the faces of these people cross the finish line. And oftentimes they break out in tears because they never thought they could do it. And they do it. And they surprise themselves, and they feel good about themselves, and it gives them reasons to celebrate, and it gives them reason to continue in the sport. And I think that's why running is such a unique, all-inclusive sport. And I think every runner who runs in a race as a story of inspiration to share with other runners. And I think this is really seen in marathons when people are packed in and running side by side for extended periods of time. So for me, there's nothing more inspiring to hear some of these heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching stories of runners who have overcome challenges or obstacles or illnesses or events that have brought them into the sport of running. I still have goals in the sport of running. I'm dealing with probably the biggest injury that's ever confronted me. I'm trying to be patient. I'm trying to practice the virtues that I share with others. And I will forever be involved in the sport because it's been such a big part of my life. And if I can impart wisdom, and if I can impart the joy of running, and if I can impart the goals that I still have, which are still to run another marathon in a fairly fast manner, and to now have an opportunity someday to run with a daughter and a granddaughter and share the joy of running with 3 generations. These are the things that keep me going. Never say never. And it may be that I run another really fast marathon. It may be that I resign myself to running 5Ks and 10Ks so I can stay in the sport for more years. You know, the story's still out there to be told, but it's still formulating in my mind and in my body and in my spirit. You have to run your own race. You can't run anybody else's race. It doesn't matter what somebody else is doing. You have to focus on what you're doing and how you feel about yourself. And as you develop that improved fitness level or that positive self-esteem, whatever it is you're developing, it really has to be developed on your own without comparison. So now you have crossed the finish line of my masterclass. My hope is now to go out and cheer you across many finish lines to come. And I only hope that many of you find the same amount or even a percentage of the amount of enjoyment and passion and reward that I have found in the sport. And rewards look different for everybody. And may you find your reward and long may you run.